I'm here with Dr. Rhonda Hampton, and we are going to discuss a suspect or a scapegoat, we're not sure which, by the name of Rick Forsberg. And today is the 14th anniversary of finding Mitrice Richardson's remains. And we're going to start a series on the multiple suspects that are on the list and have a high probability of somehow being involved in her disappearance or her death. So we're going to start with Rick because there is a lot of controversy right now because of a podcast that is circulating by Dana Goodyear and her Pushkin Industries production company. And it is really causing a lot of confusion and it is angering a lot of people. And so we're going to talk about Rick today. So I'm going to let you take it from here.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I do want to say this, that over the, 14 years since Mitrice's remains were discovered and the 15 years since she's been missing, a lot of attention has been brought to Mitrice's case, honestly, because of media and because of podcasters. So I think it's important that people are interested in her story. I think it's important that podcasters, tell her story and keep her story alive. So I think one of the problems is when certain podcasters may use their influence to guide the public in a direction um, um, that might distort the reality of the situation. Um, and in this particular case, there are people who are very excited, citizens who have called me who are very excited that they feel that Mitrice's case has been solved. They feel that Rick Forsberg, has been proven to be the perpetrator of Mitrice's disappearance and murder. And it's problematic because it might not be the case. Now, I will share with you that I am using Rick Forsberg's name only because his name is already out there.
Right.
And that he has been on the suspect list, if you will, from very early on. So this is not somebody who's not known to law enforcement, that law enforcement has given him at least 2 lie detectors, that they followed him around for quite some time. And he's a known uh, person of concern. The podcast unfortunately presents it like this is new information that the podcaster discovered and that law enforcement has ignored. Now, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department has done many things wrong in Mitrice's case, and whether they thoroughly investigated him or not is unknown to me, but that they did investigate him and that they did give him a lie detector and that they did go down to locations where he has known to frequent. They went down to the place where he had a little compound there up in Montanito. They did do those things. I'm not in the position to say whether they did enough or not, but I am in the position to say this is not a man who was unknown to law enforcement.
I would like to chime in here because as somebody who has been investigating the sheriff's department, reporting on the sheriff's department for the better part of the last almost 7 years now, largely thanks to you. What I do know is that the Mitrice Richardson case brought a lot of heat on the department, and rightfully so. Just reporting on it and going through the stories at that time related to Mitrice and unrelated to Mitrice, it's mind-blowing what we discovered and what we know. So yes. What I can say is at that time, the department took a lot of heat for what they did and did not do in Mitrice's investigation. And what we recently discovered with Detective Dan McElderry railroading a suspect in another case, my point of view is they would have probably done anything or used anything of value with respect to Rick Forsberg. If they had any little shred of anything, they could have just closed the door on this case, arrested him, and sold him down the line, just like they did Anthony Rauda. That's a whole other story. That was definitely a setup. I have no doubt in my mind that if they had that opportunity at that time, just to close the case, they would have done it. That tells me they had to have next to nothing, if not negative nothing. So that's just my point of view on it. I'll let you continue.
Certainly, I think, he does have, Rick Forsberg does have a pretty extensive history with law enforcement, a history of violence over the years, a history of violence with women. He also is an individual who admits to have seen Mitrice at the doorstep of Bill Smith's home at 4:30 in the morning on the day that she was released, or on September 17th, 2009. So he admits to seeing that, which means he's one of the last people potentially who may have seen her. One of the discrepancies in this particular situation is that he claims that he saw Mitrice at approximately 4:30 in the morning on Bill Smith's front yard, and on her front yard, at the front door, arguing with her at the front door. That time is significant to me because when Mitrice first went missing, I took phone calls from people who lived in the community who said that they heard a woman in the front of Bill Smith's home, as well as on the tennis court area, and that was around 4:30 in the morning. So that kind of corroborates her being there at 4:30 in the morning. However, Bill Smith's reports that Mitrice wasn't at his home until 6:30 in the morning, and that's a 2-hour difference that I think needs to be understood. Like and one of the questions that Rick Forsberg says in the video that where he's talking about Mitrice, there's a video out there. He says, I saw her at 4:30 in the morning, and I don't know why Bill Smith lied about that.
Okay, but we do also have our own information that we uncovered together in 2019 that basically also corroborated that by talking to one of the responding officers that we have a long-standing relationship with at Lost Hill Station, who is no longer with the department, but we had our own conversation, and this information just came to light in 2019, when Alex had, quote unquote, former Sheriff Alex Villanueva had reopened or claimed they were reinvestigating Mitrice's case. So we were privy to that long before, and were able to corroborate that time, which allowed you to talk to Stephanie Shrout, the detective that was assigned to reinvestigating Mitrice's case. So
Right.
There are corroborations that were made long ago, not just recently discovered on this podcast. And so while there are corroborations, there's still not enough there to point to a dead man as being the one who killed Mitrice. And that's basically what this podcast is trying to do, correct?
It is not. The importance though of the responding officer and the time frame there is that, okay, so Rick Forsberg puts Mitrice at Bill Smith's house at 4:30. Residents in that community called me at the time and said they heard something around 4:30. We know the only thing that we eventually hear is that Bill Smith called at 6:30 that she was in the backyard and she was not in the front yard of the house. So there was always some confusion about that. But yes, when actually information that you found when you actually spoke to the officer who responded, claims that phone call came in closer sometime in the 5 o'clock hour, which makes more sense. Stephanie Shrout, the detective who was investigating Mitrice's case for a short time, absolutely denies that, called the officer a liar. I have the duty roster. He was there in the 5 o'clock hour. And so
he told us where he started. He told us what time he started his shift and how long it would take him to get to Bill Smith's home. It's like, how do you do that? It's just,
and all of this information is just like, how do we put together the story? Because that does not mean that Rick Forsberg didn't have some encounter with Mitrice. It doesn't mean that. It just means that as we want to understand the story, we want to understand, every single detail what happened. Why did Bill Smith lie about the time frame? why was Stephanie Shrout so upset that one of the LASD officers told us what time he got the phone call to Bill Smith's house? We just need to understand that. And as far as Rick Forsberg goes, I would imagine, just as you said, if they had enough evidence to arrest and convict this man, they would have, because he would have been a perfect suspect.
They would have looked like heroes. They would have erased every bad thing they did in that case, or every wrong thing, everything. They could have taken the heat off of them so easily by nailing him. And if they had that opportunity, they absolutely would have done it. No question. Even if it was not concrete, but enough to get him behind bars and potentially filed on, and then allow it to go to court and hash it out there. Right? Yeah. We've seen this before.
Exactly. And what happens in this case is, as we're looking for justice for Mitrice, we want to make sure that the information that gets out there is accurate. It is not the case that law enforcement ignored this man. It is not the case that they knew nothing about this man. I actually provided myself the information about this man to law enforcement. I provided a video of him talking about it. I provided his name early on. I provided the names of the people who gave me the information about. That was provided very early on. And not only that, I provided the information about Rick Forsberg to Dana Goodyear. She did not just dig that information up from the dark web, as she indicates during her podcast. I provided her the video. I provided her the name. I provided her the names of the people to interview. That doesn't mean that she would not have gotten a hold of that information in other ways, or maybe other people provided her with that information also. But it is disingenuous for that podcaster to even remotely make statements that law enforcement did not know anything about that man, because that is not true. One of the concerns in the video is about the fact that she went down to his location, which I think is unfortunate, because she could have potentially been damaging a potential crime scene. But she went down there and she recovered women's undergarments that Rick Forsberg had around his little compound there. Everybody knew about that. That was not new information to anybody, including law enforcement. But she uses that as, a big aha moment that this individual who collects women's panties may have been engaged with, and also who had interaction with Mitrice, may have had her down at his command. Now, here's at his compound. He may not have. I'm not saying that he didn't, but that is still not new information. I want to add this, Cece, also, is that you and I are also aware, and I'm not going to name this man's name. We are also aware of another individual who was on. I was just
gonna try to bring that up. I'm glad you did.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. You do that. I mean, you and I discovered this again back in 2019. I was talking to a local, and she told me of this incident with this ranger who was basically a predator. And I'll let you go with that. And then I called you, and then that's how.
So and when you called me, I started doing a little research on this ranger who several women in the community have accused him of being sexually inappropriate. He is now, without naming his name, I will tell you that he has been terminated from his job. And one of the concerns that I had is, when you called me, you shared the story of this woman who had informed you that this ranger had locked her in a room in his home, and that she was in this bedroom, and that he wouldn't let her go. And in the bedroom, she began looking through some of the drawers in the bedroom, and there was in the drawer, she found baggies full of women's underwear of different sizes. And then in addition to that, when she tried to get away, he eventually made statements to her that she's lucky that she didn't end up like Mitrice Richardson. And one of the concerns is that the way that he traveled to work and home was through the very area where Mitrice Richardson went missing. That man is now fired for sexually inappropriate behavior. He's fighting to get his job back. Don't know if he will or not, but he definitely is a person of concern. And I've turned his name and information over to law enforcement. That does not mean that he has anything to do with Mitrice. But the point being, there are many individuals who are on what I consider my suspect list who may or may not have had direct contact with Mitrice, but certainly have suspicious enough behavior, and maybe even in his case, that the fact that Mitrice's name came out of his mouth as he's holding a woman, hostage essentially, making threats towards her, and she's in a room full of women's underwear. That's concerning. So, so all
And
of
that
that
was
is
not brought up in the podcast, mind you, because she doesn't know about it.
uh,
Because
she,
you and I have not reported on it.
I will tell you that that is information that I did share with
Oh,
her.
okay, great.
But there's lots of information that I have shared with her, but her direction that she wanted to take is to blame Rick Forsberg for this. And to be honest, his acquaintances, his friends believe that he did it. And to be honest, they've been telling me that from the very beginning. I have always passed that information on to law enforcement. That's never been anything that
Believing makes nothing unless you have evidence. You can convince people of a lot of things. That doesn't mean it's so. You know
my
what I mean?
concern, if we stop and say yes, Rick does it, then that means the investigation stops.
Yeah, of
And
course.
what if even though he looks wholly suspicious, what if he really didn't do it? Um, and people are truly believing that he is the murderer. I do want to say he's pretty high on my suspect list. He's not number one, but he's definitely on there. And I'm not even would not claim that this man is innocent of having done anything with Mitrice. I will not say that. I will also not say that he's guilty, but he definitely needs to be.
Do you want to say in this episode who number one is, or do we want to wait?
What? To be honest, that suspect list changes. I mean, it depends on
Of course,
what
it
I'm hearing
depends
at
on
the
what
moment.
comes into. You never know. Like today, something could come in and
Yeah,
push somebody up the list.
and
I agree. We've been working together long enough for me to be able to know that actually.
but I think it's important that those of us who are concerned about justice for Mitrice to not be particularly married to a particular person or an idea of what happened. We have to be open and flexible, because the reality is we do not know what happened to her. It could have been somebody from law enforcement. It could have been somebody who drove by and picked her up. It could have been Rick Forsberg. It could have been a ranger. It could have been many people. And if we shut our ears and eyes to new information and only focus on what we believe to be true, then we may be missing critical information. And I know that this is something that the podcaster criticizes, not me in particular, but just those who are searching for justice, that we are following, too many leads, and that those leads are distracting.
She's not an investigator. She's a podcast host.
I'm not an investigator either. But because this, Mitrice is dear and dear to me, obviously, and I want justice for Mitrice, and I want whoever did whatever to her to be severely punished for taking her beautiful life away. But I can't, I can't be blind to the fact that there are many people who were involved in her case, and because of that, there are many people who have had concerning behavior that we cannot pretend, we can't turn a blind eye to.
I wholly agree. And to blame a dead man and focus on a dead man and continue to push that narrative, knowing that there are other people who have just as much behind them to make them at the top of that list, is shameful. It's really doing an injustice to Mitrice. It is damaging our abilities to seek answers and find the person or persons responsible for her death.
Well,
And
though, I will say this, that podcaster, according to her, did try to reach out to law enforcement, who's been unresponsive. Um, and I think that that's unacceptable. I know I have reached out to them even before her podcast came out, because of concern of what she was going to release. And I wanted them to, try to intervene in any way that they could, because, some information honestly would be problematic if it got out to the public, which is why, like, I will take the stance of not using people's names all the time, because number one, I don't want to alert them that they're on the list necessarily.
yeah, no, 100%. I agree with that. And also the message that I received yesterday from one of my good friends who lives in Corral Canyon. And, she was very concerned about some of the information that was released on the podcast and locations and I mean, the people in this community are primarily alarmed at the way this podcast is being presented. I mean, the way this case is being presented in this podcast.
Yeah.
And Dana Goodyear is not doing herself any good by taking this path in this community. So that's where I'm going to go with that.
Well, I definitely want to thank you for the time today, particularly, this is the 14th year anniversary of Mitrice's, remains being discovered. And, the fact that we still don't have any answers is shameful. I believe someone knows what happened to Mitrice. I believe some of those people are very much in law enforcement, and I'm just hopeful that someone will come forward really soon so that we can, get some resolution to this.
This video was sponsored by IPS Global Aviation. Go to ipsglobalaviation.com for more information.